We have quite the selection of panelists for this discussion. First panelist is our Honorable Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Technology, Her Excellency Aminath Shiuna. Her impressive portfolio includes protecting the natural environment, action and advocacy on climate change, science and technology development, and implementation of policies on energy, telecommunication, water, and waste management. She also provides policy direction to EPA and Biosphere Reserve Office. The next panelist is Mr. Ali Shareef, Deputy Chief of Party to the USAID Climate Adaptation Project. He comes from a scientific background with a profession in meteorology and climatology. Mr. Ali Shareef played a key role in the formulation of the Maldives Climate Change Policy Framework, Maldives' first biennial update report to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, second national communication. Panel moderator, Mr. Mohamed Inaz, is the Director of Climate Change and Sustainable Developments at FJS Consulting and has over 20 years of experience working in the field of environment, climate change, renewable energy, and sustainable development. He led the environment and energy portfolio of UNDP Maldives for 8 years. Without delay, kindly please welcome Honorable Minister Shiuna, Mr. Shareef, and Mr. Inaz.
Good morning, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be with Minister Shiuna and Ali Shareef, and I will also later call on. I think we need Dr. Nasir later on here as well because of what he has presented earlier. Maybe just request for him to. Thank you, Nasir. Incidentally, I was also quite new to accounting and accountants, but about 12 years ago, I was in a training on climate change negotiations. One of the sessions was about accounting for climate change. And that blew my mind off because, there was a whole new world to me that never was explored for about 12 years of my previous life. And then there's this huge link between accounting and climate change. And this happened on an island nation far off of Africa. And I was thinking, what have we done in Maldives in terms of accounting for climate change? And I've been talking about that a little bit since then. But this is, as Dr. Nasir pointed out, the biggest ever accounting forum I've seen, with accountants in them, and looking to understand climate change or sustainability. I think if we were to account for the chairs we are sitting in, this is not the ideal chair for me. A good accountant would have a smaller chair for me because I can't lean back or I can't sit up. But this is also what climate change is doing to us, because we are having to adapt as climate change brings all kinds of challenges towards us. Maldives is, you all have faced rain that you have not faced when you were younger. The freak storms that we are having were predicted before. So these are, actual climate change that we are living in right now. And we are having to adapt, we are having to, wear different shoes or wear different clothing and then go back to office and change. Similarly to my chair, I would have to have a cushion or whatnot to adapt. So that's what's happening. So it's very exciting to have a climate scientist amongst us. I know Ali has been doing a lot of work on climate change. He actually runs models on climate change. He waits for supercomputers for 2 days to see his models to work. So actual scientists here. Dr. Nasir, same. He studied the reefs of Maldives like nobody ever has done, and he is the authority on reefs, I would say. So when he says Male is a reef, we don't question that. And Minister Shiuna has been in the policy environment for a while now on climate change, environment, and she would readily connect somebody's quote on TV or somebody's quote on a report and say, this is what you said earlier, and this is what this country needs to do. So she's very talented in terms of drawing out policies from whatever you throw at her. So that's us here, and I probably will start off with where Dr. Nasir left off, but that question I will probably pose towards Mr. Shauna. He mentioned about moving beyond GDP, and this is quite attractive to me because, yesterday also we heard quite a few speakers mention about how Maldives has done so well in terms of growing GDP from a few hundreds to close to 1,000. And then, we are very proud of that. But all of that depends on this blue economy, isn't it? We have been a blue economy for a while, isn't it? How is, measuring GDP or beyond GDP important for Maldives? Can we unpack what that means for Maldives, GDP or beyond GDP? How would you picture that, Minister Shauna?
Thank you, Inaz, and thank you for inviting to speak here. Like Dr. Nasir said, I'm also quite intimidated to be here because we often speak with scientists and the natural scientists, but you're the financial scientists here. I think often we think that we are so diverse from, there's a huge gap between the natural science and the financial science of things. But I think today we have come to a point where we can't differentiate between the two professions to an extent that we have to work together because natural resource is one of the factors of production, we say. I think everyone here today are people who respond to numbers. You respond to values that are attributed to finance. And the four of us here, we mostly talk about 1.5 degrees. And in your keynote address, you also mentioned about 1.5. I wonder how many people in this room actually are familiar with the number 1.5. For us, in 10 years, the climate scientists say that the world will go beyond 1.5 degrees of warming. For countries like ours, that's actually quite a scary thought. The Maldives is very much affected by climate impacts. When we think about GDP, GDP is also a lot of numbers. It's compilation of a lot of values as well. The first concept of GDP was introduced in the 18th century. None of us here were there then at the time. We were not even born. Modern day GDP concept was introduced in 1934, before the UN was formed. So we know that this is, I'm going to say this, that is an archaic way of calculating how wealthy a nation is. Back in 1930s, climate change was not an issue, and I think that's probably why the concept of value in natural resources, the concept of climate impact on development and the wealth of a nation was not incorporated into the calculation of GDP. And even in the Maldives, as a country that is so dependent on blue economy, on the oceans, if you think about our fisheries, if you think about our tourism, if you think about our expenditure, revenue, everything is so closely linked to the goods and services that's provided by the ocean around us. But that is also extremely vulnerable to 1.5. And if we overshoot this 1.5, we're going to be significantly impacted in terms of our GDP as well. Even if we calculate it with the archaic ways, our GDP is going to be significantly impacted if global warming goes beyond 1.5. Before I came here, I was having a conversation with the Auditor General and the Vice President of the forum as well, about how we calculate our GDP. And I think I asked whether most people in this room would understand how our GDP is calculated. I think to combine, to understand fully the impact of climate change on our country's wealth really means we all in this room and every single person in this country needs to understand how the magic number is calculated. And I looked through some of the literature that's been published about our GDP, and it's based on expenditure, consumption, and different sectoral growth and all these things. Today it is about $10,000 per capita. And I don't think anyone in this room probably earns that much. So that really tells us the problem with GDP. And if we are able to value the natural resources, and happens that many, many years ago, I also did my thesis on economic valuation of coral reefs in the Maldives. And this is a concept that we need to incorporate into when we calculate the wealth of our country. The wealth of our country depends so much, not on the goods and services and the revenue measures that we understand on land-based, but how connected this is to the goods and services that's provided by our ocean, by the health of the reefs, and by the health of the natural resources that we have. Today, we are a middle-income country, but I think if we really incorporate the impact of climate change on our water resource management, on the health of our reefs, on the air quality that is throughout our country, and it will become so apparent how important these natural resources are. Today, every island has access to electricity, and most of the islands will have access to clean water and sewerage services in the next 1.5 years. And the issue of waste has not been resolved effectively in our country. And these three services are essential, in my opinion, when we say how wealthy our country is, because these are essential services that are closely linked to the impacts of climate change. Our water resources has been almost depleted in every single island. Our islands are eroding. Our reefs are, on an annual basis, impacted, bleached because of the impacts of climate change. So essentially what would happen in a world that is 2 degrees is none of these services will be provided to our people effectively in a way that will keep us in the middle income group and that will continue to help us grow. And I think that is how scary climate change is, and that's why it's so important to incorporate these services that are provided by the natural ecosystems into our GDP in calculating how wealthy our country is.
Thank you, Minister. I was expecting a thorough answer, but that was more than what I expected as well. Thank you so much. But that also takes me to why climate change is such a critical issue for us. It's not just critical, it's, I think, an existential issue for Maldivians. We have now declared Maldives a country under a climate crisis. We have a climate emergency bill right now, climate emergency act in place right now, which goes to show that, at the highest levels, we understand that this is an issue that we need to address, and we have a ministry with the title climate change in it as well. So these are all signs of how serious the situation is. I want to bring in our climate scientist, Ali Shareef, into this. Minister also mentioned quite a few development headways that we'll be making in the next few years. We have had a lot of development come in, but all of these are at risk. How do we make sure that these developments are climate proof? How do we make sure our investments are climate proof? Because if we don't, then it's doomsday, isn't it?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the organizers for inviting me to speak here. And like everyone else, well, I had the opportunity to do some accounting back in the 95 when I was doing my O-levels, but that was about it, I think. But I mean, it's really good to see, lots of accountants and economists here who are keen into, listen to this topic. So it's really, really soothing to see that. So just to get onto your topic here, how we could, do this climate proofing. Like the minister said, I'm sure that most of the people here wouldn't have a clue of, what that 1.5 means and when that 1.5 is going to, really reach or hit us, and what kind of disastrous impact that it could have on us. So, so we are very good at, doing our development, and our development is going quite fast, really, really fast. And with the growing population, we are doing lots and lots of reclamation. We are doing lots and lots of, I would say, damage to our reefs, of the oceans. And the negative impacts that we are doing today is not going to, maybe we are not going to see it today, but we are going to see it sometime later on. What the impact has done sometime before, we are feeling it today. Like the minister said, when the industrial era began, the development, they didn't have all these sustainability principles in place. They just took the development as it is. The emissions were to go, just sky high. And now we are trying to, when the globe has started to cook, we are trying to limit that. So first of all, to answer your question of, making the climate-proof assessments, the very first thing, like the keynote speaker has identified, most of the accountants would know when it comes down to the dollar or the money value. So unless, as scientists, we could bring the impact, the value of impact, or the damage it could do to a financial figure, these people here wouldn't have a clue or wouldn't understand or wouldn't even put that into your balance sheets as somehow to account for that. So we need some way of, doing the assessment that, or should not you have done this, or should not, have taken this measure today. Okay, that measure could be a bit more expensive today, because, say, for example, if you're going to address the sea level rise for another future 50, 60 years, yes, you would have to place some hard infrastructure, which might be the initial capital would be a bit expensive, but think about you guys are very good at doing the avoided costs when you do your forecasting. So if you really put that into your calculations, then you'd be, doing a lot on your climate de-risking or climate proofing on lots of investments that the business people are making. So I think one of the key thing is to make or to bring that information out that should you not have done this kind of assessments or taken into consideration the damage that it could have. That's very important to get in these balance sheets.
Thank you, Ali. That's interesting because I was also thinking about how when we talk about blue economy, we're talking about, for us, mostly what's underwater, slightly a bit over water as well, but mostly the 99% of Maldives. And when it comes to have we valued it, do we know how much how much of wealth we have actually? We don't, do we, Dr. Nasir? The oceans know no boundaries. So.
Exactly, yes. I think many of us might know, well, some of us here at least might know, that we tried to look for oil in the Maldives in the 40, 50, 60 years ago. There were wells drilled in the Maldives, and they probably have, these are the world's most important, the world's most advanced companies, Shell company, for example, was working here in the Maldives. So what I'm trying to say is that there may be resources that we might or may not be aware of at the moment because if you knew what I was talking about in terms of the depth, we are just living at the very, very, very tip of very high mountains, a mountain range you could think of, in the Indian Ocean. So these mountains, or this platform, is about 2,002 kilometers deep. And we just live on the top few meters of this, and whatever resources that we exploit at the moment is very limited to what we can do. So in order to go beyond that 2,000 meters, and in order, you need to, if you want to look for oil, you need to go beyond that 2,000 meters to another 2,000 meters, So it is that difficult to achieve what you may have right now. So I think it's very important to understand that we have many resources in the marine realm that we can utilize. Many countries, for example, have a very advanced mariculture facilities where you would exploit the marine resources to the extent. But if you go to a tourist resort, tourists probably come here thinking that, okay, the Maldives is a country of coral reefs, and you would find the world's best seafood restaurants in Malé. But you all will know that there are no seafood restaurants in Malé. There are no seafood restaurants in resorts even. If you have a seafood restaurant at a resort, it will be all imported material. So what does that tell you about the sustainability? Why is it that we don't have a very well-developed aquaculture or mariculture sector? So these are the kinds of things. There might be, I know, while I say this, that last week the Ministry of Fisheries, Marine Resources and Agriculture signed a very important agreement to start mariculture work with a large company in the south, But we have been trying to do that because there must be inherent reasons why we have not been able to tap certain types of marine resources. There may be. Why is it that the Maldives is just a tuna fishing nation? Why? What has made us so focused on exploiting a very narrow research base for such a very long time? So these are things that will eventually, I believe, will be addressed so that our future generations would be in a position. But then of course, like the minister mentioned, and also like Ali mentioned, it all depends on how we can manage these resources sustainably for the benefit of the future generations. We are talking about that 1.5 degree is very important. Climate is very important. So the negotiations that we are doing around the world, and it's very important. You might also like to know, for example, in 1998, over 90% of corals in the Maldives died. Why? Because of temperature-induced coral bleaching. Coral bleaching has killed almost more than 90% of shallow water corals in the Maldives. Then coral reefs recovered pretty well in the next 15 or 16 years, but by the time we were hit again by another climate episode in 2016, where we have lost again a similar amount of corals. But we are talking about corals, and corals provide habitats for fish and other varieties. We are talking about the importance of the tourism industry and many other fisheries as well. The intricate details we don't know. But so it looks like, you could conclude that it looks like there was a massive coral death in 1998 in the Maldives, and then when the next episode hit in 2016. So when the reefs were in very good condition, in most part of the world, the reefs were in very good condition in 2015. So you could conclude from this that not natural, but such loss of corals may take at least 15 to 20 years for them to completely recover. which is a very tall order. You know, you can imagine how, if something happens in between, and if coral bleaching happens every other 2 years or something, corals may not have that capacity to recover. You know, so these are the important points that we need to remember. And also, when you talk about natural assets, you know, I think they are very different from tangible assets such as a building or something, and how you take care of it, and how much it depreciates, you know, how much it depletes. You know, these are also based on economic principles that we need to understand, and we would not understand that unless we understand how a reef grows, what resources are there within a reef. As I told you, Malé is a reef. You know, how much have we destroyed Malé Reef? You know, how much has we developed over Malé Reef? You know, what have we done to other reefs around? You know, what have we done to Gullifollow, Gullifollow, Tilafollow, and all the rest? You know, so these are all very linked. And when we talk about natural capital, we have to be mindful that there are principles that we have to follow as well. Thank you.
Minister, you wanted to add?
One of the things I wanted to mention is when we're talking about climate proofing, it's critical to understand how we are being impacted by climate change. Most of the small islands in the Caribbean, for instance, they get hurricanes almost every year. And rather than that kind of rapid impacts, the Maldives experiences more slow, what you call slow onset impacts of climate change. That means our resources are being affected because of climate change in a gradual manner. We don't have hurricanes or typhoons or cyclones which completely destroys our infrastructure annually. But when we think about slow onset, I think a lot of our businesses are experiencing the changes already. They are feeling the heat already. For instance, the insurance of resorts, businesses are on the rise. And this is something that we really need to think about. How can we work with people who make decisions on insurance to incorporate impacts of climate change on our resorts and our critical infrastructure and other businesses? Because this is an important part of how we adapt to climate impacts and how we can reduce the costs of this as well. I don't believe that we as a government should bear these costs. And as someone who has worked not in this role, but in other roles, I have seen how much money we are spending almost every year on compensating people for the damages from stormy weather and frequent floods and impacts of swells and these kind of things. So the costs are on the rise. How much we're spending on water, on disaster risk, and we're not even calculating the costs of these storms on our fisheries sector, the cost of these storms on critical infrastructure, the cost of these storms on the number of days fishermen are not able to go out to fish. So these costs are not even calculated. So there's a big flaw on how disasters risks are not incorporated into national accounting. And this, I think, is a severe gap, and that needs to be filled. And I hope that people in here, in this room, are able to come up with a formula to incorporate these into our public finance and the numbers that we're talking about, including GDP and in defining how wealthy our country is. Also, another point I want to highlight is most of our critical infrastructure are located just within a few meters from the shoreline. And like I said, most of our islands are eroding. Most of our islands are being affected by floods, by coastal inundation as well. What happens when all of these islands, powerhouses, are flooded and critical infrastructure is damaged? So when we think about public finance, when we think about, when we calculate the costs of these disasters, impacts of climate change, I think we start to realize how important it is to climate-proof these investments, even though they are a bit more expensive now. We really need to find ways to adapt to a world that is 2 degrees. And for a country like ours, 2 degrees is going to be very challenging, and that's going to happen in our lifetime. Everyone here are going to experience these impacts. And we may not be able to remain in that middle income group. We may not be able to even move up the ladder as well. So I think that's why we need to have a proper national dialogue on these that includes you and that includes us as well.
Thank you. I think that puts home the message very strongly. And together with what Dr. Nasir presented about how coral bleaching is, again, a deadly scenario for our economy, because if we see more frequent events of coral bleaching, which is predicted actually in climate change, that there would be more El Nino, La Nina events that are coming in, which can trigger coral bleaching. If we don't get 15 to 20 years recovery period for these, that means the entire economy of Maldives is in danger, and what Minister pointed to at the last is not really, a figure from a movie. It's something that we might actually have to face. Ali, are there any, actual climate models or predictions specifically for Maldives that can relate to what this discussion is moving towards?
Well, the straight answer is no. We've got only global simulations, which is, what we have to downscale those global scenarios onto our Maldives and then see what sort of impacts that it could have. So since you brought that topic, I think that's, see, when you see those climate models, you can see that, with a big dash line and where you get a big band going around that, showing, the uncertainty. And most of the time when I speak to, the non-climate people, what the answer which I get is, you guys just predict this for another since 2000, and you've got this huge band of uncertainty. So my response is, okay, when you do your finance forecasting, did you really forecast the COVID events? Did you really forecast the Ukraine war? There are many things. The whole world is full of uncertainties. So that's something which we have to live with anyway. And then we try to make the best approximate that we could. And over time, we have been really improving that. And looking at the IPCC scenarios, those scenarios have really, really improved. And we can predict to a good, within a certainty, which is why, we make those decisions, but based on some uncertainties. What's the certainty that you go into the road and you're not going to hit by an accident? No, still with that 50-50 we are living. So it's the same. So with those models, the global models are out there, the uncertainties are there, something that we have to live with, and something which we have to consider, but they are becoming very good, very approximate, and we can, with a certain high degree of accuracy, which we can use in our decision making. So yes, the models are out there. It is applicable to Maldives as well, if we put it in the right way.
Thank you. I remember when we were doing the first national communication to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the models at that time, put together with the bathymetry of Mali, in 2023, we were going to be underwater, but the models have refined itself, and it's a better model. It's not that stark a picture, but it's still a dangerous picture. Now, we're talking about sustainability and blue economy, and I know the government has been doing some work in this area. Maybe, Minister, you could highlight what's coming in terms of blue economy for Maldives.
I don't think what's coming is the answer. How can we refine it is the real question we want to talk about. The Maldives has been so dependent on tourism, and to a large scale, that tourism has been sustainable, focused on sustainability as well. We've also been a country that is extremely dependent on fisheries as well. But what more can we do in terms of benefiting from investing in blue resources that is most sustainable. One of the references that Ali Shareef made was about, for instance, reclamation. There's an increasing public demand. I'm not looking into businesses and tourism at the moment, but there are some islands that are genuinely running out of land. And also, as in the IPCC report, this was also mentioned, reclamation is almost a double-edged sword for countries like ours. On the one hand, we are losing land, and we can't, as an adaptation measure, how can we invest in ways to increase our land that is more resilient to the impacts of climate change? If you look into Hulumale, for instance, some people refer that as an adaptation project as well, which is that withstands flooding and other issues. When we think about blue economy, there are ways that we can use our seagrass beds for even carbon credit schemes as well. There are ways that we could forego reclamation and be more focused on how can we protect these carbon sinks where we can earn from these resources. And there's a lot more debate that's going on in the climate space about these kind of things. How can we use our ocean in a way that we can produce seafood, for instance, where most of the seafood for our tourism sector is imported at the moment? And how could we use emerging and new technology that is based on ocean resources to produce electricity, such as ocean currents and ocean thermal energy for electricity production? How could we use more investments in wind energy in terms of producing energy? How can we use our lagoon space for floating solar as well? Another thing where we import a lot of our food, a lot of our vegetable, a lot of our fruits are imported into this country. But now we know that countries like Singapore, for instance, are heavily investing in new technology where vertical farming and agriculture is used for production of vegetables and fruits. So I think these are increasingly, the issue is not the lack of technology. The technology is available. And I think our smallness of our country is actually an advantage for us, because we can use the Maldives as a laboratory to test these emerging and new technology that can then be scaled up in other countries. And so investing in more technology for energy production, for food security issues that we're facing because of the impacts of climate change, using our seagrass beds, using our carbon sinks for ways to diversify our revenue base. These are all, there's so much discussion at an international level, global level, that we should benefit from these. And I think our financial sector needs to be more engaged in these to understand how can we benefit from emerging climate finance and discussions at a global level.
Thank you very much. I think the point about how, climate change actually hits Maldives, this is a ground zero for climate change, essentially. Because, as the previous speaker mentioned, climate change impacts our profits. It impacts the peace, because once we start losing land, there's going to be commotion. It impacts people, definitely. It's already impacting. Mr. Shiuna alluded to the fact that people are demanding land because they don't have land right now. And it's going to impact partnerships. We will need more partnerships to work with this. There are a lot of questions coming from the audience. Yesterday I was here almost all day. We have more questions than the entire day from yesterday. So definitely, we are doing a good job, I think. A pat on the back. But some of these we might not be able to take on within the next 6 minutes that we have left. But one of the most interesting questions that have come in for me is how do we get businesses to focus on on long-term goals of sustainability. And, of course, making a profit. Maldives is known for quick profit. You invest in a few years and you get a return and a big bonus. But that's at a cost. And what we heard yesterday was, we've explored successfully Male and the nearby regions for tourism. Let's explore further down south and up north. But if we do the same, we might not be, using our resources at, the best way it should be, given that climate change is here. 1.5 and 2 degrees are not anymore, fairy tale. It's here. So the modus operandi needs to change. The business needs to change. But how do we make businesses understand, beyond short-term profit? Maybe I can throw this first at Dr. Nasir.
Yeah, thank you, Inaz. I think when you talk about the blue economy and sustainability, the Maldives has shown by example that we can indeed develop on a platform of sustainability. I think some of us here would remember when we opened some of the resorts in the 70s and 80s for tourism development, for example. If you look at those old proposals, sustainability was a big part of it. You needed to have the best available sewerage network systems that does not impact the surrounding reefs. You need to have incinerators. You need to have bottle crushers, compactors. In fact, it was impossible to get a permit to operate a resort at that time without this equipment that deals with the waste that is produced in resorts. But I know it's not working perfectly. But what I'm trying to say is that our industry, tourism industry, is totally reliant on marine resources. So I think many of the industry experts currently do realize, the importance of conservation, the importance of maintaining diversity, biodiversity, and so this is perhaps an area that we need to enhance through regulations, through better management practices. We have a number of things that we have already planned, and I think if we all work together, we can go a long way on that.
Yes, just my answer is simple. Think of the sustainability of your businesses about the investment that you're making today could benefit you in the long run. I mean, say for example, when speaking about this blue economy, it actually surely connects with the service sector as well. Say for example, when building our resorts, the main thing that we consume is the diesel, because every resort is powered by diesel generators, and which is quite expensive. And whenever the oil price fluctuates, it hits on the economy as well. So the technology is, rapidly growing. I mean, we remember, those days when we went to the hospitals to take the X-rays. We get the film in 1 week. It takes 1 week to get that film. Now it's instant. So maybe tomorrow it's a matter of time we get that on the phone apps. So, I mean, the technology is growing that fast. So think of those technologies where, those energy from the ocean could be harnessed. There are OTEC, which is rapidly growing, which is rapidly proving. The currents, the waves, the temperature differences. Our ocean, the shelves are not that long compared to some other parts of the world, which is to our advantage, like the minister said. So when you, put your businesses, do that calculation of, the long-term investments that you do today, which might be, yes, a bit big, but not only your IRR for 7 years or 5 years. Yes, make it a little bit longer, but you'd be, getting quite a good benefit in your future investment and the profits. So think about that when you do the businesses.
Minister.
When The Wealth of Nations was written by Adam Smith in 1776, I think even in that book, there is some reference to some of the issues that we're talking about today. The apparent conflict of nature and development and wealth. But today, this is not a conflict that is in isolation. This is an issue that we need to resolve together. To what extent do we continue to exploit the natural resources to an extent that affects our quality of life at an individual level? I think that point has come today. So we are at a point that we need to rewrite the wealth of nations. Maybe the green wealth of nations or the wealth of green nations is what is needed. Blue nations, yeah. So essentially what I'm trying to say is giving a green thumb to Adam Smith's invisible hand is what is required. And I don't think it's, Inaz, I will differ with you on this. I don't think it is easy. Doing business in the Maldives is easy. It is a very risky thing, I think, actually. When you think about a country that was in poverty in the 70s, and to be a middle-income country, that's the hard work of a lot of people, I think. And I recognize that, and I think now we need to find ways to work together with how we can continue to sustain these limited and vulnerable resources that we have to continue to benefit from our tourism sector, from our fisheries sector, from the emerging new technologies that's available. We import, not at today's prices, but we imported $450 million of fuel in 2019. That's where we need to invest, divest from fossil fuels, and even as a country that is contributing 0.003% to greenhouse gases, I think it is time that we divest our resources to more renewable sources that can keep our foreign exchange in our country, that can again be invested in natural resources such as ecotourism to diversify our economy and to provide more sustainable sources for essential services such as water and waste resource management. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. We've just had the message on screen saying your time is up. But there's a very interesting question among the many interesting questions that have come up. And unfortunately for Minister Shiuna and Dr. Nasir, it's targeted towards one of you. So either of you could answer. And I thought we should just take this question because it's very current and it relates to very current discussions that are going on. So here goes the question. Has Maldives considered fully the implications of the loss of the EEZ on south towards Chagos archipelago? This is the discussion of the day, so we should have a talk on this. Has Maldives considered fully the implications of the loss of the EEZ on south towards Chagos archipelago? And what would be the impact on fisheries if Mauritius sells license for fishing with nets? So, yeah, go for it.
I think I'm the only one here who would answer this question as well. The issue of Chagos, I think, is a very political one as well at the moment. The way how it's been spun in the public has been very political. From what I understand, we've always understood that there is a boundary issue between the islands of Chagos and the Maldives. In 1992, when we first held official discussions on this issue, on the boundary that is overlapping between the islands of Chagos and the Maldives, the government of Maldives in 1992 agreed that this distance, this area that is overlapping is going to be addressed by using the principles of equidistance. And we are a member of UNCLOS. We have ratified ITLOS as well. So there are three ways. I'm not a maritime lawyer, but the three ways that are available for us to resolve this dispute. The government of Maldives in 1992 agreed that we will use the principles of equidistance. Today, the issue is not about the overlapping boundary. And in 2010, the government of Maldives declared our continental shelf as well. In 2017, the ICJ has the ICJ has made a ruling that Chagos belongs to Mauritius. So this is not about us losing our territorial boundary that we had not known about. The discussion is not about that. The discussion is about where do we measure that equidistant point from. The government of Maldives today has been represented by the Attorney General is arguing the case that that point of measuring equidistance has to be from the shoreline, not from a submerged reef, which is a bit north of the Chagos Island. We have always known that there is a boundary that overlaps between Chagos and the Maldives. So I think it's not about losing our territorial boundary. It is actually resolving a boundary dispute that has existed since time immemorial, you know. And the second question is, what if Mauritius has practices more unsustainable fisheries? The Maldives has been affected by unsustainable fisheries in the Indian Ocean, and we as a country has been advocating for sustainable fisheries in the Indian Ocean for many years. And Dr. Nasir, as someone who has worked in this field, can explain to you about what the Maldives leadership has done in order for us to better govern fisheries in the Indian Ocean, and also what contribution the Maldives has made. That is not going to stop. That leadership is not going to stop based on what happens in ITLOS. Whatever ruling and decision is made on ITLOS is not going to affect our leadership and continued advocacy for sustainable fisheries in the Indian Ocean. What other countries do in their boundaries is not something that we can really affect. The Maldives has been a #1 advocate of conservation beyond national boundaries, as national jurisdiction as well. We have been advocating at international level for protection of 30% of international waters by 2030. And as a country that has taken leadership both in the Indian Ocean on conservation and at international level of high seas conservation, whatever happens in ITLOS is not going to affect it. I just want to make it clear that this boundary conflict has been there for many, many decades, and this is not an issue that is being discussed at ITLOS today.
Thank you, Minister Shiuna. I know this very well because that 1992 boundary line, there were 2 people who were involved in drawing those lines, and I was one. So, but maybe Dr. Nasir can talk about, maybe in just 2 minutes, probably the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission and all, how this is managed. Yeah.
I thought it would be better you have a fisheries session in the afternoon, or before that, you'll have experts from the fisheries ministry to whom you should propose this question. But I would, as Inaz just pointed out, tuna fisheries in the Indian Ocean is managed by the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, for which Mauritius and Maldives are also important members. And as the minister pointed out, the Maldives has been advocating, Maldives as the largest polyline fishing nation in the Indian Ocean, and also a country where net fishing is banned, seining is banned, and there are, this has always been a lingering point of other fishing nations, including distant fish fleets in the Indian Ocean. So that will always be there. I guess the only difference will be that the current area, which when managed by the UK, would be termed as the British Indian Ocean Territory, is conserved area, but I also strongly believe that this will only be dealt with regional cooperation between countries. And as the minister rightly pointed out, whether Chagos belongs to Mauritius or the UK, the boundary between is set by international rules and regulations. That will not change. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we'll stop at that. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity, giving me this opportunity to conduct this session. You've seen that it's very difficult to stop us when we start talking, so we'll just stop at that, and thank you for listening. Thank you for all the questions that you've sent in. We are sorry we are not able to take all the questions, but this is overwhelming, and I think we can have discussions later on, while we go for tea as well. We'll be happy to talk on that. Thank you very much, and we'll stop at that.
Panelists, kindly remain on stage. Thank you so much, panelists. That was informative and positively thrilling. I kindly request CA Maldives President and Auditor General, Mr. Hussein Niazi, to present the speakers with token of appreciation. Dr. Nasir, Minister Shiuna, Mr. Shareef, and Mr. Inaz. Once again, thank you all.